Hello, my name is Jim McLean, and I'm doing my classroom changes assignment for Seed 741. So the first part of this assignment was to interview interview our clinical educator. And so for what I did for this one is I talked about a few different things. So my main thing was mainly just getting more information about what her methods and experiences were when she was a rookie teacher or when she was kind of newly experienced, and how she did in her first few jobs. Then how those have changed over time, like what certain activities and methods and styles that she's done over time, and how technology has influenced her teaching, and some of her goals when doing her project-based learning that she's kind of evolved over time, because I just know from experience that working with her, that's what she's doing, and how she meets the needs of diverse learners, because there's quite a bit of diverse learners in our district, and there's been more and more over time as well. Um, so, as I got into the interview and what kind of I got out of it in terms of what she gave me was that she used to do a lot more lectures and notes and use mainly textbooks. And she would sometimes veer off the textbooks, but she didn't really have necessarily the freedom or the confidence to go off by the textbooks and kind of do her own thing. She tried to tell a lot of stories, and I know that is kind of a valuable thing when doing social studies as well. But then after time, she's involved into doing maybe a little bit less of the lecture and notes. Still doing that to give them a base of knowledge, especially with older kids. She's done a lot of middle school, but especially at the high school level now, she still has to do some of those lecture and notes and more of the quizzes and tests and those kind of things. But she likes to give more assignments and projects that involve reading, providing details, finding a stance, taking an argument, involving student opinion and critical thinking, and taking applicable materials to real life and to student lives, and what's going on in the world and why students at that age should care about it either in the present or in the future. She's also evolved her technology, has made it a lot easier to find compelling resources, and she allows students to kind of find those, and is usually impressed with what some students can really find and what they find important in a lot of the research that they do. A lot of problem solving and awareness of the present and future, like I said before. Just a lot of relatable and kind of applicable, but also students can evaluate how important it is to them, and are critically kind of aware of the world around them, especially in geography. It's kind of open ended. It should be more of the students doing the work, but also just being more aware of the world. And she likes to get to know students and be flexible with them and work with them. She loves giving feedback and providing and helping out students, but she really puts it on the students that they need to be accountable for their learning, and they have to ask for help if they need it. Um, and advocate for themselves. She does a great job of diversifying and connecting with special ed, making sure her audio and visual learners are taken care of, and different needs are met. So my experience with social studies growing up was a lot of memorization, but I liked that and was really into that because I loved learning about random facts and finding information that was important to me. But I got a lot from teachers that made the um, made the facts and memorization um, meaningful, because what I found meaningful was what they found meaningful. You know what I mean? So it's more of like them taking the time to pronounce what they really find important in the content, and then I can relate to that or figure out if that relates to me in a way. So I had a few teachers that were good at that. My seventh grade teacher, he did do a lot of memorization, but he made sure that it was the right things, if you know what I mean. Because it's kind of like there's almost so much content, and he really let us find, what was important going on in the world today and why that was important, and um, he just was very good at that. So I asked a lot of questions, and so did a lot of my peers, especially in high school. But some of the teachers that we had in high school, particularly, didn't really like that, and others, there's maybe one or two that did. They really liked that, having that conversation, having that dialogue with their lectures. There was a lot of reading on our own. Especially in class, which I found really kind of annoying as well. My freshman world history class was just all reading. So we read it, we maybe took a little bit of notes, did a worksheet, and then had a test. And I think that it was just very not inspiring at all. It was just a lot of memorization and digging for things, but also like nothing anything really enjoyable about it. Like it just seemed really bland. Um, it's almost like we were reading in black and white, if that makes sense. So we have to read things, but we also have to bring them to life a little bit and put a little color into them. So there was a lot of what, where, and when questions in my U.S. history class in high school and in middle school too, but not much of the how or why. So we didn't really explore the reasons behind things and why things were happening and how things happened and sequenced. And it was a lot of not a lot very good creative or critical thinking happening. And there's a lot of individual specific interests that a lot of kids have, and um, so we weren't working together cooperatively. That's kind of what I mean by that, by very individual. It could have been a little more challenging. It could have been more cooperative, but it was all kind of individualized. Everybody was kind of doing their own work. There wasn't a lot of group projects, those kind of things. My methods that I kind of want to do is primarily develop, at least when I'm in my classroom, I want to develop student interest and goal setting. I want to have goals for myself. Maybe students can help me with those, and we have to have kind of a class goals and student individual goals as well. Um, a lot of things about goal setting, I think, go back to Hattie in chapter 9, mainly because they want to make them realistic and easy to obtain, especially early on, to kind of gain confidence. But there's a lot of like valuable learning in self-monitoring and competing with students' individuals' previous experience, previous performances that Hattie talks about. Um, and I think we could do a lot of that collaborative thing with teacher and students doing rules and procedures, as Marzano talks about in chapter 6. He wants to establish a lot of small set of rules and procedures that kind of everyone is involved with. I would really like to get to know students and do some lecture as well. Through those goal setting, I hopefully get to know students a little bit more, and then through lectures, I always been told that you have to do 2 times the grade level on average. And I think that's subjective as well. I tend to do, in middle school, it's usually around the 10-minute mark of notes and lecture. Maybe veer into 15 a little bit, but I noticed in middle school you kind of got to keep things moving. You got to keep things into 5 to 15-minute chunks, and you kind of have to move from activity to activity and keep kids moving. But in high school, you can maybe go a little bit longer and do longer lectures. I kind of want to do small group and partner and individual deep dives. So I think a lot of that kind of revolves around reciprocal learning. That I kind of want to role play and have students be in different roles, being kind of the leader of the dialogue and doing questioning and scaffolding for their peers, doing some peer tutoring. I think that's really valuable, especially in the middle school age where they're very social. I really want to model a lot of these, how you do things and do discussions and feedback and model ways to write. And I think that's really important to do as well, is just to really be a model for kids that are really trying to learn. Marzano and Hattie both talk about planning a unit and being more content specific learning segments, like I talked about, chunking out things. But I think Hattie in chapter 10 talks a lot about students taking a turn and leading the dialogue. And I feel like the more cooperative learning and diverse processes that you do is really important, especially for Marzano. In Marzano's chapter 10, he just talks about developing a flexible draft of daily activities for a unit, and kind of having a set amount. Some of them say that you should have a really specific sets of amount of activities, but I'm more of on the idea of having kind of a wide variety, especially in lecture, because I feel like lecture can get really boring for kids. And if they have at least like 3 or 4 different ways that they can take notes, they can either choose one, or we'll say, okay, today we're going to do this method of notes. We're going to do fill in the blank. Or today during notes, all I want you to do is make up five multiple choice or true and false questions, and then at the end of the period, you're going to give your quiz to a friend, and they're going to take it. So those kind of things I think are fun, and I want to do some quizzes and minor tests, but I want to really focus mainly on project-based learning. Um, I saw kids in my own class doing National History Day this year, and that was a really unique thing. They did a whole year long project. Basically, first quarter to third quarter, they were doing this year long project, and they had a lot of good stuff going on. They created a lot of things. It was really cool to see. But the whole making arguments and having student centered questions or student creating questions and finding authentic sources, I think, is really important for a lot of that. So I think there's a lot of affective process and cognitive processes that you can get out of that, which kind of ties back to Hattie chapter 9, kind of having that experience in the community and sharing your project with them kind of gives them a little bit more value added feedback, both from student to student, adult to student, teacher to student, that kind of thing. So a typical day for me would probably start with bell work. So when I think of bell work, I think of, having an established routine, talking about Marzano in chapters 9 and 7, talking about maintaining expectations and procedures and lesson segments that will eventually become a routine. So one of those things that you could do is having a themed bell work, which is what my middle school CE did really well. And Hattie chapter 9 talks about worked examples being a really powerful, really effective teaching practice. So doing things as an example in mass, like doing an example problem or an example situation that you're working on with students, doing them together and then having students do them on their own. Probably a 10-minute teacher presentation of some kind, either with video, multimedia, some sort of visual element with pictures, especially if you're trying to take kids somewhere. You got to have the visuals. You have to let them grapple with it. So maybe using a note-taking technique or a way to journal their insights. Doing different methods, I think, helps with that. Some reciprocal, some varied content presentations. Some strategies that just kind of get kids into the content, give them some background. Then I want to go into an activity or task, usually maybe a short reading passage connected with the lecture, maybe some writing opportunities, some prompts where they can discuss things. Just do a lot of stuff that they talk about in Hattie chapter 9 is concept mapping, which I really like mind mapping, graphic organizers, word webs, compare and contrast, Venn diagrams, those kind of things. I love having students being able to write things down and visually kind of make them work, especially because I'm just more of a spatial learning kind of person. So that all, works with me. But Marzano talks about being flexible, and I'm one of those people that's going to be very flexible, hopefully, with doing different activities and making sure that students have enough time for everything. And then at the end, I usually want to give students the independent time they need to work. I want them to create personalized products. So there are diverse processes through the concept mapping and the flexible activities. Usually, maybe I would hope gets them into more of an independent and group work thinking that is personalized and it brings out student interest, like Marzano talks about in chapter 8. You want to bring student interest into the content and personalize the learning activities. And also I want to do a lot of like check-ins and feedback. Feedback seems to be like the most, one of the biggest things for me. So I wanted to end talking about feedback a little bit. Hattie in chapter 9 talks a lot about that when feedback is combined with correctional review, feedback and instruction become intertwined. So like I talked about before, the affective and cognitive processes become kind of merged, and the issues is where students receive and interpret the feedback. So I really want to make sure that students really interpret it and take it in. So modeling that, and also, making sure that they don't see feedback as kind of a negative thing, like, oh no, I'm getting told to come to Mr. McLean's desk. I'm kind of being signaled out here. But if it's a routine and it's for everybody and everybody goes through it, either individually or as a group, you have to make it an established norm and expectation. And once you model that for kids, students to student feedback can happen, and peer review, and I think a lot of higher order learning and critical analysis can really happen too. And students, especially in middle school, need to learn how to do that. And once they get to high school, they got to know that feedback is for everybody's growth as well. So I feel like a lot of feedback is really good for students, and even them, I would love to receive feedback from them as well. So I hope you enjoyed my video, and if there's any questions that you have, please let me know. My name is Jim McLean, and I hope you have a great day. Thanks.